The room went silent the moment Trump leaned forward, narrowed his eyes, and said it. "You're playing dangerous games, Traoré." The cameras kept rolling. The debate had been tense from the beginning, but now, it was boiling. Ibrahim Traoré didn't flinch. He didn't blink. He just smiled. Then, in a voice so steady it felt rehearsed, he replied. "I wrote the rules." A wave of gasps echoed across the CNN debate studio. Even the moderator hesitated. Was this just theatrics, or had something deeper just shifted? Donald Trump, seated stiffly across from Traoré on the stage, scoffed and adjusted his red tie. The former president had come prepared to dominate, to overpower, to mock, but this wasn't the kind of opponent he was used to. Ibrahim Traoré wasn't deferential. He wasn't defensive. And he sure as hell wasn't intimidated. What was supposed to be a symbolic summit, America meets Africa, a global leadership dialogue, had exploded into something else entirely. It was part policy talk, part power play. The format was meant to showcase diplomacy. But what America got was a showdown. Behind the cameras, the control room was chaos. Producers whispered urgently into earpieces. The moderator tried to redirect, "Let's keep this constructive." But Trump raised a hand. "No. Let's talk about rules. You're sitting here because America allowed it. Because we built this world. And you're just learning how to use the tools we designed." Traoré leaned forward, elbows on the table. "No, Mr. Trump. I'm sitting here because you couldn't stop it. Because your rules were written in ink, mine are written in blood, in rebuilding, in sovereignty. You forgot that not every game ends the way you plan." Trump's mouth tightened. This was supposed to be his stage. Instead, it was becoming Traoré's. Social media erupted. #Traoré was trending within minutes. Commentators scrambled to adjust their talking points. What had started as a symbolic exchange was spiraling into something historic. In the audience, a quiet observer in a gray suit, U.S. defense analyst Mark Thorne, turned to his colleague and whispered, "He's not just answering questions. He's rewriting the script." At that moment, Traoré's expression changed. Not hostile. Not smug. Just deliberate. As if every word had been planned long before the lights came on. This wasn't just a debate. This was war by words. And Traoré was winning the opening round. Backstage, Trump's aides scrambled. One whispered urgently into his earpiece, "Stick to the talking points, sir. Don't let him set the tone." But Trump had already leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. He wasn't used to being challenged, not like this, not on live TV, not without fear. Ibrahim Traoré wasn't playing defense. He was rewriting the field. Across from him, Traoré looked calm. Too calm. That unnerved people. Americans were used to African leaders coming in either with gratitude or grievance. Traoré came with neither. He came with facts. And fire. The moderator turned to Traoré. "President Traoré, you say America's rules don't apply anymore. What exactly do you mean by that?" He didn't hesitate. "Rules written in Washington, enforced in Paris, and signed in silence by weak leaders, those are not my rules. The world is shifting. And power no longer flows in one direction." Trump scoffed. "Without American money, your country would still be in the dark." The audience stiffened. Traoré didn't blink. "Without our minerals, your tech wouldn't light up. You call it aid, I call it interest on stolen time." A silence fell over the room. Somewhere in the control booth, a junior producer mouthed, "Oh my God." Trump shot back. "We invested. We didn't steal." "You invested," Traoré replied sharply, like a thief who leaves a coin on the table after taking the gold. The tension was suffocating. The moderator tried to pivot again. Let's move to economic cooperation. But Trump wasn't done. You think you're a leader, Traoré? You're playing a role, that's all. Without us, no one hears you. That's when Traoré sat up straighter. He leaned into the mic and said, "Then hear this, Mr. Trump, I am not here to be heard. I am here to be obeyed, by my people, not yours. And they don't need your permission to rise." The studio went dead silent. The phrase echoed. Not here to be heard. Here to be obeyed. Somewhere deep in the Pentagon, a general rewound that line 5 times. In the audience, a young African-American journalist named Lena Hayes stared at Traoré with wide eyes. "This," she whispered, "this is different." Because for the first time on American soil, a leader from the global South wasn't asking to be invited in. He was kicking the door open. And Trump? Trump was finding himself in a room he didn't control. Trump adjusted his tie, but the sweat forming on his brow wasn't from the studio lights. For years, he had mastered the art of controlling the narrative, headlines, soundbites, reactions. But this time, someone else had taken the pen. The moderator hesitated before asking the next question. "Mr. Trump, what do you say to critics who argue that American foreign policy in Africa has been more about control than cooperation?" Trump grinned. "We've brought stability. Roads. Hospitals. Phones. You're welcome." Traoré turned toward him slowly, as if dissecting every syllable. "Let me correct you, Mr. Trump. You brought contracts, debt, and consultants. We built the roads. We laid the bricks. You brought cameras when it was done." Trump raised a hand. "That's ridiculous. We built your entire economy." "You built dependency," Traoré countered, voice steady. "And called it partnership. You trained our soldiers, then sold weapons to our enemies. You praised our elections. When your favorite candidate won." The crowd murmured. Some clapped. Some gasped. But everyone listened. Then, Traoré added the knife twist. "You talk of democracy like it's a charity. But when our votes go the wrong way, your embassies go quiet." Trump's face hardened. "You've benefited from the global system, and now you want to tear it down?" Traoré didn't smile, didn't blink. "No. I want to rebuild it. But this time, the foundation will not be written in English or French, it'll be written in blood, sweat, and our own languages." Even Trump paused at that. At home, millions of viewers, Americans, Africans, and the diaspora scattered across the globe, were glued to their screens. Not for spectacle, but for something rare, clarity. Backstage, Trump's campaign manager leaned into his phone and muttered, "He's shifting the balance. This guy, he's dangerous. He's not looking for applause. He's looking for leverage." Meanwhile, in Ouagadougou, children in internet cafes were chanting Traoré's name. Not because he humiliated Trump, but because he refused to kneel. He hadn't just answered questions. He had questioned the very answers the world had been taught to accept. And Trump, for the first time in a long time, was on his heels. The camera cut to a wide shot of the stage. One man leaned back in his chair, chest puffed, face flushed. The other leaned forward, calm, calculating. Between them, years of diplomacy, resentment, and raw power hung like smoke. "I don't need to be lectured by someone who's ruled for barely 2 years, Trump scoffed. "You think you understand the game, Traoré, but we invented it." Traoré's response was almost a whisper, yet it struck louder than any roar. "You invented the rules, for yourself." He leaned back now, mirroring Trump's posture. "But power isn't held by those who write the rules. It's held by those who know when to break them, and still win." Trump blinked. That line didn't just cut through the air, it rewrote it. The moderator, unsure how to follow, cleared her throat. Let's pivot to economic policy. No, said Trump, interrupting. Let's stay right here. Because this man wants to sound tough on television, but let's be honest, he wouldn't last a week in Washington. And you, Traoré said coolly, wouldn't last a day in Ouagadougou, without your private jets, your lobbyists, and your golf courses. The audience laughed nervously. But Traoré wasn't smiling. This isn't theater for me. I don't leave a studio and walk into comfort. I walk into sabotage, hunger, and broken contracts left behind by your diplomats. Then maybe you should thank us, Trump snapped. Because without America, your nation wouldn't even be on the map. That was it. The temperature in the room dropped. Traoré's eyes narrowed. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't need to. I've buried soldiers who died holding that map. Children have bled on it. Women have marched miles for water on it. Don't tell me who it belongs to. A long silence. Even Trump, usually quick with a jab, was momentarily silent, the sting of history more biting than anything on his cue cards. Backstage, advisors were scrambling. He's hijacking the tone, one aide whispered. Trump needs to pivot now. He's bleeding ground. But on stage, it was too late. Traoré had done something rare, he had changed the axis of the conversation. From ego to ethics. From slogans to stakes. And Trump knew it. That's what made it hurt most. Trump tried to laugh, but it came out dry, a sharp exhale more than humor. You know what your problem is, Traoré, he said, wagging a finger like a scolding parent. You think emotion equals strength. You think pain is policy. He leaned forward again. But the world doesn't care about your scars. It respects money. It respects military. That's why we lead. Traoré tilted his head. Then explain why so many are walking away from your leadership. The moderator's eyes darted nervously between them. But she said nothing. No one interrupted this. Trump smirked. Because they're fools. They don't understand the cost of freedom. No, Traoré replied. They finally understand the price of dependency. And then he did something unexpected, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded document. Slowly, deliberately, he placed it on the table between them. What's that? Trump asked, narrowing his eyes. The 1987 agreement your State Department made with one of my predecessors, Traoré said. A deal that gave American companies 80% control of our gold reserves. In exchange for what? A few outdated trucks and a photo op. He slid the document closer. You call that leadership? Trump didn't touch it. Didn't even glance at it. Instead, he waved a hand dismissively. That was a different time. No, Traoré said. That was your time. This is mine. For a moment, the studio was silent except for the hum of the cameras and the rustle of paper. The weight of history sat between them, undeniable and damning. Trump leaned back again, suddenly more defensive than dominant. You know nothing about what it takes to hold a superpower together. I know what it takes to rebuild after one tears you apart, Traoré said without blinking. Offstage, producers scrambled. The analytics board showed something stunning, the live stream had just broken 1.2 million viewers in under 30 minutes. Comments poured in from every continent. He's dismantling Trump's legacy live. This isn't a debate. It's a reckoning. But inside the studio, it wasn't about algorithms anymore. It was about legacy, and whose story the world would believe. Backstage, a storm was brewing. Fox executives, White House aides, and foreign correspondents watched the live feed in disbelief. One producer whispered, "We can't cut to commercial again. It'll look like retreat." Another murmured, "We've lost control of the narrative." And yet, on stage, Traoré hadn't even raised his voice. The debate had shifted into uncharted territory. Traoré wasn't attacking America. He was dissecting the illusion of its moral monopoly, calmly, surgically, without spite. And that made it more dangerous. Trump, feeling the shift, adjusted tactics. He turned to the audience, leaning into the performance. Let me ask the crowd, do we want a man like this lecturing us on power? On leadership? He runs a country smaller than most of your counties. Laughter. Uneasy. Staged. Traoré waited, then stepped closer to his podium. You want to talk about size, he said. Empires have fallen to ants when they stopped paying attention. That quieted the room again. He turned to the audience now too. My country's size doesn't shame me. But what does shame a leader is using fear to justify hypocrisy. You speak of greatness, Mr. Trump, but greatness doesn't look over its shoulder every time someone speaks the truth. Trump's jaw flexed. You're out of your depth. I swim in deeper waters than you've ever dared, Traoré answered. For a brief second, it seemed like the former president might lunge, not physically, but rhetorically, desperately. But he hesitated. Not because he feared Traoré. But because he feared losing the crowd. And the crowd was no longer laughing. The moderator, sensing the tension, tried to steer things back. Let's focus. No, Traoré interrupted. Let's stay here. In this uncomfortable truth. He looked into the camera, not at Trump. You sell freedom like a product, he said. And when we don't buy it, you call us backward. You talk sovereignty, but only when it's convenient. You build walls around your ideals and wonder why no one wants to visit. People were tweeting it live. Walls around your ideals. Hashtag Traoré debate. Trump folded his arms, letting his silence speak now. But even that silence felt like defeat. It wasn't that he had nothing to say, it was that anything he said might make things worse. And Traoré knew it. Because in a world built on rhetoric, silence is often the loudest scream. After the debate, Washington didn't sleep. Every major news outlet scrambled for analysis. CNN called it a seismic shift in geopolitical discourse. MSNBC labeled it an indictment of Western arrogance. Fox News tried damage control, framing it as foreign disrespect, but even their anchors looked rattled. Meanwhile, Traoré didn't celebrate. He met privately with his aides in a quiet D.C. townhouse. No media. No applause. Just strategy. Trump will retaliate, said his chief advisor, Amadou. Maybe not with words. But with influence, backroom deals, pressure. I know, Traoré replied calmly. But the point wasn't to win him over. It was to show the world something else. What? That we're no longer afraid of the microphone. Across town, Trump was fuming behind closed doors. He embarrassed you, said one of his donors. No, Trump snapped. He embarrassed the system that let him speak. The room went silent. Trump wasn't just angry. He was calculating. Get me connections at Africom. I want to know what projects we've frozen in Burkina Faso. Aid, trade, arms, will tighten the valve. Let him feel what real power looks like. Back in Traoré's circle, a warning came swiftly. The IMF sent a message. We may reconsider the current loan program given your administration's tone. A U.S. Embassy memo suggested future cooperation may depend on more respectful dialogue. And then came a quiet email, encrypted, unofficial, from a think tank in Brussels. You're a symbol now. Be careful. Symbols make easy targets. Traoré read all of them in silence. Then he walked out to the back patio, where the late DC wind brushed his face. He wasn't naive. Every word on that stage had come with a cost. But so did silence. Inside, his communications director asked, "Do we go public with the threats?" "No," he said. That's their game. Let's play ours. In the days that followed, clips of the debate went viral in Kenya, Brazil, Indonesia, even parts of Europe. Millions of young people reposted Traoré's lines. "You sell freedom like a product. Empires have fallen to ants." He was trending in places he hadn't set foot in. Not because he shouted, but because he didn't. And somewhere in a marble hallway of Capitol Hill, an aide muttered to his superior, "Sir, we might have underestimated him." The pressure escalated behind closed doors. At the Pentagon, generals met with senior advisors to discuss a quiet reshuffling of intelligence resources across West Africa. No official order was given, just a subtle redirection of satellites, analysts, and budgets. The target wasn't war. It was monitoring. "They're watching Traoré now," whispered a State Department official. "Not just what he says, but what he enables." At a private D.C. dinner, Trump vented openly to a circle of media elites. "He's a showman," Trump scoffed. "And like all showmen, he's one act away from irrelevance." A journalist dared to ask, "But don't you think he's got the attention of?" "Attention?" Trump interrupted. "You think hashtags are power? Power builds empires, not trends." But while Trump dismissed, others were listening. Inside Georgetown University, a panel of foreign policy students hosted a live-stream breakdown of the Traoré-Trump debate. The moderator asked, "What happens when the Global South stops playing by Global North rules?" A Zimbabwean student answered bluntly, "You get men like Traoré." In Paris, a French senator went off-script in a Senate session. "France's colonial ghosts are now meeting men who carry mirrors." Meanwhile, Traoré stayed quiet. For a week, he gave no interviews, no tweets, no speeches. Instead, he met with grassroots organizers from Haiti, youth leaders from Senegal, and economists from the Global South. They weren't there to flatter him, they were there to build. "This moment isn't about one debate," Traoré told them. "It's about replacing applause with infrastructure." Back in the States, Trump was preparing his counterstrike. A major foreign policy summit was being organized. The theme? Restoring global order. He would speak there. So would select African presidents known for their Western alignment. The message was clear: Traoré would be isolated. But when the summit lineup was leaked to the press, an unexpected twist followed. Ghana, Nigeria, and even South Africa declined invitations. "Until African voices are treated as equals," Ghana's foreign minister said, "we're done posing for the photo." Trump was livid. "He's poisoning them." "No, sir," an aide corrected. "He's waking them up." And somewhere, Ibrahim Traoré stood at the edge of a quiet conference room, looking at a map of resource pipelines. "You can't cancel the soil," he muttered. The summit went ahead without Africa's giants. In Washington, the Grand Hall gleamed with gold trim and blue banners that read, "Restoring Global Order." Flags from select nations lined the walls, mostly old allies, predictable attendees. Trump took the stage under thunderous applause, but behind the curtain, the air was tight with disappointment. "This should have been a show of strength," grumbled one organizer. Instead, it felt like nostalgia. Trump began his speech with bravado. "The world needs leadership. Not lectures. Not slogans. Leadership." He turned his gaze toward the camera. "And to those who think a mic and a flag make them revolutionaries, I built towers while they built tweets." It wasn't subtle. It wasn't meant to be. The room clapped, but the enthusiasm was hollow. Moments later, Trump turned to his closing line. "The future belongs to those who know how power works. And we still write the rules." But he didn't know what was happening 5,000 miles away. In Ouagadougou, Traoré stood before a crowd of students, journalists, and rural leaders. It wasn't a summit. It wasn't televised. But the room was electric. "No one owns the future," he said calmly. You either build it, or you wait for others to hand you the scraps. He paused. Trump said, "I don't understand how power works," he added, a slight smile breaking across his face. He's right. I don't understand how his power works. I understand something else. He pointed to the audience. I understand what it means to defend your water with your hands. I understand what it means to grow crops without subsidies. To stand in the sun without protection. That's power. His words echoed in small radio stations, WhatsApp threads, and underground podcasts across the continent. Meanwhile, international media was catching on. Headlines appeared. Trump versus Traoré, the new global divide? Africa's not clapping anymore. Burkina Faso's Traoré speaks loudest in silence. In the White House, a policy advisor warned, "We might have underestimated him." Trump waved it off. Let them bark. The system doesn't move for noise. But a late-night intelligence brief told a different story. Across 11 countries, civil society leaders were referencing Traoré in their speeches. Protests in Chad, youth marches in Cameroon, teachers striking in Mali, all citing the same mantra. We're done borrowing rules. Traoré didn't attend the global summit. But his absence had rewritten the conversation. It was night in Ouagadougou when the call came in. Not to Traoré's office, not through official lines, but to his personal phone. The voice on the other end was low, deliberate. "You've stirred the old empire," the caller said. "They're watching now." "I know," Traoré replied. "Let them." He hung up, walked to the balcony of the presidential residence, and looked out over the city. The streets below were quiet, but the silence pulsed with energy. Change was no longer a whisper, it was a drumbeat. Inside, his team was gathering for a late meeting. Reports had come in, new sanctions being quietly discussed, diplomatic cables leaked, lobbying groups in D.C. pushing for containment. "They're not used to this," said his aide. To someone saying no. "They'll adjust," Traoré answered. "Or they won't. We move either way." Across the Atlantic, Trump was watching a segment on Fox News when the headline rolled across the ticker. Traoré sparks global realignment. He scoffed. Let the boy talk. But privately, he was beginning to understand. This wasn't a rebellion. It was a rewrite. In the weeks that followed, Traoré launched 5 new initiatives, none reliant on Western funding. He signed mutual development pacts with Asian and Latin American partners. He invited scholars, not diplomats, to design his education reforms. And he appointed a new cabinet minister, a former street vendor who'd led last year's youth protests. "He doesn't just talk," said a CNN commentator. "He builds." On TikTok, a clip of his speech, "I don't need permission to be free," racked up 12 million views in 4 days. The algorithm, it seemed, had chosen its new face of power. Traoré watched none of it. He didn't need the applause. He had the roadmap. One evening, standing before a group of children in a village school, a boy raised his hand. "Sir," he asked shyly, "is it true that you challenged the most powerful man in the world?" Traoré knelt to meet the boy's eyes. "No," he said gently. I reminded him he's not the only one. The room fell quiet. No need for slogans. No need for thunder. Just the truth, delivered without flinching. And as the sun rose again over Burkina Faso, one thing was clear. The rules hadn't just been challenged. They'd been rewritten. By someone they never expected. By a soldier. By a builder. By a man who didn't ask to lead, but who made power listen anyway. Warning disclaimer. This video contains fictional content generated with the assistance of AI. It is not a real event and should not be interpreted as factual or representative of any individual's actual behavior. Viewer discretion is advised. They called him reckless. They called him a rebel. But Traoré didn't need their approval. He didn't wait for permission. He stood, when others bowed. And in doing so, he didn't just speak for a nation. He spoke for every voice that was ever told to stay quiet. This wasn't just a political moment. It was a warning. A new era isn't asked for, it's taken. And Traoré? He's already writing its first chapter. Subscribe for more stories they don't want you to hear. This is the Untold State.